The following program is part 2 of 2 parts, each 90 minutes long. There is support material available at this website, including quizzes, handouts, and lecture outlines for all presentations. Consult the UCTV programming guide for the date and time that other lectures in the series will be shown.
The California native plants will tolerate water out around the edge of the leaf strip. It's just they will not tolerate them up in the root crown area. We don't know the exact reason why, but it's sort of logical to assume that these trees have evolved through thousands and thousands of years of not having moist soil up against the root crown area. And as a result, they probably have an air exchange between the woody part of the plant and the outside. And if we keep that soil moist, we prevent that air exchange and the trees die. We frequently don't find any disease-producing organisms in there at all. Sometimes we do, but they probably could be there and just have taken over because the tree was weakened. And so the main thing is to be sure to keep water away from the root crown area. And this is true not only of California natives, but natives to other parts of the Mediterranean type of climate, such as from the Mediterranean or South Africa or the southern part of Australia. All of these plants get winter water but not summer water. And so treat them accordingly. Killing whole plants now with disease-producing organisms. Up to now we've just been on non-infectious diseases. Now we're calling about disease-producing organisms. Fungi. This is damping off. Damping off disease where the organisms infect the plant right at the soil line. They girdle the seedling and the seedling falls over and that's the end. This is the most common form of damping off, but we also can have other forms. Plant on the pot on the left had a fungus in it, and it invaded the seed of some of those and caused seed decay. Others, after the seed began to germinate, the fungi went in and invaded that seedling before it emerged. We call this pre-emergent snapping off. And so the damping off fungi can do 3 things. They can do pre-emergent damping off, they can do seed decay below the soil, they can do post-emergent damping off, the kind that you're familiar with, above the soil. And you have to try to control that if you're having this problem. Now there are several things that you can do. First of all, culturally, don't plant your seeds too close together because they compete with each other and they make themselves more susceptible to damping off. Don't plant your seeds too deeply. If you do, they will use up their energy getting to the surface of the soil. They will be weak and they'll be more susceptible to the damping off organisms. There's an old rule of thumb that says plant your seeds 6 times their diameter in depth in the soil. Well, you have to use a little bit of common sense. If you took a petunia seed and multiplied it by 6, you still wouldn't have anything. And you have to get them in the soil so that they can germinate, you see. But be careful, don't plant the seeds too deeply. Don't overwater, and of course that's very obvious. Overwatering will weaken the plants. It also will favor the fungi. Don't fertilize before you sow your seeds. All seeds that you'll be growing have enough nutrients in them to take them through the time until you either are going to transplant them or thin them, and at that time you fertilize. If you fertilize ahead of time, you're going to make them more succulent and they're going to be more susceptible to damping off. And so you can control that by not fertilizing until the correct time. Also, if you're just using a small amount of soil, you can pasteurize it. And when you pasteurize it, it means that we're not going to heat it anything above 140 degrees for 30 minutes. This will kill all the disease-producing organisms, but it will leave many of the beneficial organisms. Put it in your oven, make the soil moist like it's ready for planting, 1.5 inches or 2 inches deep. Put a thermometer in the middle of it. One that goes above 140 degrees, be sure. Put it in the oven and turn the oven on. Now the problem that we have with ovens is that the lowest thermostat setting on most is 200 degrees, and you don't want that. You want only 140. So you stand there and watch the thermometer as it approaches 140, turn the oven off by cracking the door and turning the... You can keep it right at 140 degrees for 30 minutes. You have to be there to do it, but you can do it. Once that soil is cool, or that soil mix is cool, it's ready to be planted. Don't put it in a dirty flat or a dirty pot, but it is pasteurized and you can sow your seeds in there and you probably won't have too much trouble with it. Don't ask me if you can use your microwave. We have lots of root rotting fungi, I've told you already. The most common ones are called the water molds. They like wet conditions, they like weakened plants. They do a lot of damage. If you grow the same plants in the same soil year after year, you may have a problem. This is particularly true with pansies. Pansies, if you grow them in the same soil, build up the disease-producing organisms that are there, and pretty soon you won't be able to grow pansies there. So don't grow them every year, rotate, grow something else in that soil. Here's a cyclamen. No roots at all, absolutely no roots at all, due to root rot. Common in many plants, particularly certain types. Azaleas, rhododendrons, Daphne, very, very susceptible to root rotting organisms. And it's due to the fact that we are not giving them the cultural conditions that they like. Rhododendrons, azaleas, Daphne are either native to northern climates or they're native to higher elevations in mountains. And under these conditions, the organic material does not disintegrate as much as it does under higher temperature conditions. It tends to accumulate. Under those conditions, you have beautifully drained, beautifully aerated soils, and that's what these plants want. And you take an azalea or a rhododendron and you dig a hole and put it in adobe and you expect it to grow, and it's not going to do it because it doesn't get the aeration that it needs. It has to have aeration. Prostrate junipers, killed by water mold fungus. This particular place, they asked me what was wrong, and I told them what was wrong, and I told them what to do, and the next time I went by, they had flood irrigated it. A couple months later, I went by, and it was green concrete, so they solved the problem. Plants in containers also are very prone to root rot, and in fact we might say we have more trouble in containers because we do such a terrible job of growing plants in containers. And so we lose a lot of them, particularly junipers, which don't want to have summer water. Part of the trouble is that we don't grow plants correctly. Before water will drain out of the hole and the plant and the pot on the right hand side, the soil immediately surrounding that hole has to reach complete saturation. This is a known physical fact. It's been known for years and years and years, but nobody has done anything about it. Now, what happens if you put a bunch of junk in the bottom of the pot to improve drainage? You raise that saturation level, and the more you raise it, the more you prevent drainage, and the less drainage you have, and the worse the plant's going to do. How many of you have ever opened a 5-gallon can from a nursery that had a layer of gravel in the bottom? What did it smell like down there? It stinks, absolutely stinks. And the reason that it stinks is because that soil above that layer of gravel has been saturated so long, we have what are called anaerobic conditions. Under anaerobic conditions, microorganisms develop that give off foul odors, probably toxic to the roots, but there are no roots there because there's no air. You have to give these plants. So don't put any junk in the bottom of any container. And these sweet little old ladies that have done this for 99 years just almost beg if they can't put something in the bottom of the pot. So I finally give in and say a piece of screen if you have to have something. But the only reason you'd really want to put a screen in the bottom of a pot is to keep slugs or snails or sawbugs from getting in. So do it for the right reason. Don't do it because you want to keep the soil in. Everybody says, oh, if you don't have something over that hole, you put water in, it's going to wash the soil out. If you put enough water in to wash the soil out, the plant's not going to grow anyway. So, just don't put anything in the bottom of your containers. Another fungus listed on your outline is Rhizoctonia. Rhizoctonia is a soil-borne fungus, also has a wide host range. It attacks the plants right at the soil line and causes a collapse. Now, you may not be able to tell that dead plant from one that has been killed by the water moles, and both of them are common. So that means you may have to get them to a plant pathologist to take into the laboratory and culture. And this is known as job security, you see. plant on the right has Rhizoctonia, the plant on the left doesn't. Here's what Rhizoctonia did to pansy. Just completely clobbered them. Kills the plant. Rhizoctonia, the name of the fungus, is on your outline, and that's a pansy plant killed by that. Well, killing whole plants, sometimes you can't tell by killing a whole plant. This is in my backyard. This plant was killed by armillaria, and the only way we can diagnose it is by looking at the signs. And we're going to come to signs later on, so I'll tell you how we diagnose that tree. Same thing true with this peach tree. You can't tell by looking at it what's wrong with it, but I'll show you how we diagnose it later on. On your outline, Fusarium Wilt. Fusarium Wilt fungi are common in the soils. They are high temperature fungi. They get in through the water conducting tissues and they kill the plants. They're found mostly on herbaceous plants, but occasionally a woody plant will have it. This is Eustoma or Lisianthus. This is one of the reasons why you don't see many nurseries growing it. It's one of the reasons why when you take it home and plant it in your garden it dies, is because this fungus is very, very serious on it and it kills the plants. Here's Hebe, also infected with a Fusarium. This is one of the few woody plants that's infected with Fusarium, and it kills the whole plant. Just really does. It gets in there, and all of the Hebes are susceptible, so there's no good of trying to find a resistant one. The only good thing about this is that the Fusariums that do this are host-specific. The one that goes to Lisianthus doesn't go to anything but Lisianthus. The one that goes to Hebe doesn't go to anything but Hebe. The one that goes to tomato doesn't go to anything but tomato, and so forth. They're very host-specific. So if you lose some plants, some Hebe plants, just plant another ornamental shrub there. It'd be no problem. Verticillium. We already talked about Verticillium. Verticillium rarely kills plants. Soil-borne, just like Fusarium, gets into the water conducting system just like Fusarium, but it has a wide host range. It goes to a lot of plants, but it doesn't kill plants usually. In rosemary, this is a rosemary planting for one of the spice companies. It just really raised havoc, killed many, many plants. On your outline, a fungus named Sclerotinia. This is one you may see in your home garden. This fungus is sort of common. It infects many plants, usually from the soil. It gets into them and it just kills them very rapidly. Here you can just see this petunia plant just really ruined. And I'll show you a little bit more later on because we can identify it by signs too. We talked about late blight earlier in the fruits. It kills the tops of the plants. Here you can see it in the process of killing. This plant is going to die. There's no way that plant will stay alive. Late blight can kill it. And this, I wouldn't usually put it in the slide series, but this last year we saw lots of late blight all through the Bay Area. And I don't know if you had it down here, but I would be suspicious that you did. Dutch elm disease, a problem in American type elms. A very serious problem. The fungus was introduced the eastern part of the country many years ago. It spread throughout all of the United States, gradually killing the American type elms. It's an interesting disease because the fungus is found principally in the channels that the bark beetles form underneath the bark. And it produces its spores in there, and there's nothing serious about this. The bark beetles emerge, and generally the bark beetles are attracted only to weakened trees. So if they're just healthy trees, there's no problem, and there's no more disease that can be started new in new plants. But there's one quirk about the bark beetles that makes it different, and that is for a short period of time in the early spring, the bark beetles feed on the new growth. Just a short period. And they come out of these tunnels, they're completely covered with the spores of the fungus, they feed on the new growth in the elm tree, they introduce the spores into that, and those trees become infected and soon they die. The fungus also can spread from one tree to another by root grafts. And so we've lost virtually all of our American elms through much of the country. There's still areas which don't have much Dutch elm fungus in them, but They are working on getting new hybrids, and they have several new hybrids which are even beginning to appear to look like the old American elm, which has that open vase shape rather than the upright shape or the smaller tree form of the Asian elms. And the Asian elms are resistant because that's where the fungus occurred naturally, and so they developed resistance against it. But eventually we may have some elms. Generally, viruses do not kill plants. We occasionally see romaine lettuce just die. And romaine lettuce dies from a result of infection of a virus which is called spotted wilt virus. We'll talk about spotted wilt virus. But if you have this near callas or near dahlias or near chrysanthemums that have the spotted wilt virus, thrips will transmit the virus to the cos lettuce, the romaine type lettuce, and then it will die. It just dies. Well, that's not very clear. This is just wilting. I only put one plant in to show you wilting, because you all know what wilting can result from a lot of things, usually root rots, but many other things. But if you see a plant like that, particularly rhododendron, you know that that root system probably is not functioning. Could be due to weevils that are feeding on part of the plant, could be due to water moles that are working on part of the plant. But this is a sort of a step-by-step procedure in rhododendrons where some of the branches will wilt and then more. And this is just as the root rot fungus is going through the plant, eventually it'll kill the whole thing. This is something that we call edema. Edema is spelled E-D-E-M-A, unless you're an old-timer like I am, and I learned to spell it O-E-D-E-M-A, and that's the way I spell it. So, but I put it both ways because some of you may want to know about the new way of spelling it. Edema is something we don't know much about. The cause of edema has not been determined. We can't find any organisms there. We get corky-like growths on the undersides of the leaves. They say it has something to do with watering. I disagree with that. I think it's something else, but I haven't proven one way or another. Edema is common on some plants more than others. Ivies have it. Geraniums have it. Ivy leaf geranium has it a lot. Peperomia has it a lot. You can even find it on the fruits of some plants. Here it is on fava bean. You can even see it on the fava bean fruits sometimes. So it's a common problem, but don't worry about it. It's not going to hurt the plant. It may make it look unsightly, and if it bothers you enough, throw the plant away. Misshapen fruits. This is due to poor cultural conditions. One of the problems with tomatoes, and you probably are aware of it, is that if we have too big a temperature difference between the day temperature and the night temperature, you don't get fruit set. And this is due to the fact that tomatoes don't produce pollen under those fluctuating temperatures. They're self-pollinated. If they don't produce pollen, they don't set any fruit. The flowers drop, the little pedicels hang down with no fruits on. Well, they've selected some tomato cultivars that will produce pollen under all conditions where they might be having trouble. And one of them is called San Francisco fog, and this is San Francisco fog. Now, if you grow San Francisco fog under low temperature conditions like we have, you get this miserable, crippled, ugly-looking fruit, and I would rather not have a tomato than have that. We have a disease that's called fasciation. There are several types of fasciation. This is non-infectious fasciation. We don't know what causes it. We have no idea. Well, we have some ideas, but we don't know what causes it. It causes the stem to be flattened, and it causes leaves sometimes to come out from the flattened part. Sometimes it causes flowers to come out. Sometimes it causes the stems to divide, and you get proliferation of the stems. This happens to be a Bells of Ireland that has fasciation. Here it is on Kalanchoe. I actually have taken cuttings right from that fasciated part and rooted them. I cannot reproduce the disease. I cannot get a fasciated plant. Here it is on Agapanthus. I grew that same bulb for 5 years after this, and it produced a normal plant each time. I could not get it to produce that fasciated stem again. Okay, excessive growth. This is due to lack of light. This poor plant was growing in an area where it wasn't getting enough light, and you can't see it because it's too dark, but the top of that plant comes clear all the way down and grows back up again. If you don't give plants enough light, they will reach for light and you'll get more growth than you normally would. Here's a chrysanthemum that didn't have enough light. Here's a geranium that's reaching for light. Okay, these are all the non-infectious diseases where we have overgrowths. Now we're going to start talking about some where we have disease-producing agents. These are going to be bacterial at first. This is crown gall. Crown gall results from infection by a bacterium which causes the large swelling, usually right at the root crown area, and that's where it gets its name. But that gall is not restricted to the root crown area. Interestingly enough, the rose budder who was budding this particular rose must have dipped his or her knife in the soil, picked up some crown gall bacteria, and when they inserted the bud, they inserted the bacteria. The bacteria grew and the bud didn't. That's sort of interesting, and you could take advantage of that except for one thing, and that is that the crown gall organism does very little damage to plants. But we have a problem with the State Department in that they will not let plants be sold if they have crown gall in them. If you have a lot of 30,000 cherry trees and 2% has crown gall in them, you can't sell that lot of cherry trees. So economically it's very important, but as far as plants are concerned, it's not important at all. It doesn't do damage to plants. Sometimes those galls can look pretty ugly. There's a man who grows roses up in our area, and he claims that this damages the plants, but I haven't seen any damage on plants. One thing you might confuse with crown gall is woolly apple aphid damage. Woolly apple aphid damage only goes to apples and pyracantha in this area. It does cause swellings on the roots, but those don't look like brains, you know, they're just sort of Uncle Lumpies sitting there. And so maybe that's the way you can tell about. If you find this on plants other than pyracantha or apple, it might be crown gall. You might have to check into it. The woolly apple aphids spend part of their life cycle on the roots, part of the life cycle above plants, and on the above ground plants, parts of the plants, they can cause swellings like this. Those little white flecks that you see are the aphids. They cover themselves with a waxy-like coating, so you see that fluffy-like material there. Closely related to the crown gall bacteria are the hairy root bacteria. The hairy root bacteria increase the number of roots like this. We don't see it often in California. Back east it's more common. But in California it's considered a disease, and if you have plants like this, you have to throw them away. One of the interesting things that has happened is that in Montana, where they have such a short growing season, they decided they would have to do something when planting bare root trees. If they plant bare root trees, the winter is there so soon that the plants have hardly started, and so they don't grow very well. So they looked around for different isolates of the hairy root bacteria that would go to different plants, and they inoculated their fruit trees with them. They produced good root systems on them. Those trees, after 7 years, were still growing better than the ones that had never had the hairy root bacteria. So maybe this is a beneficial bacterium that we just are beginning to realize. At Davis, they grow a lot of apples in tissue culture. And if they grow the apples too long in tissue culture, they lose their ability to produce roots. And with no roots, they can't do anything. They found that if they infect those tissue cultures with the hairy root bacterium, they can produce roots on them, and when they plant those plants out, they can't tell them from the ones that produce roots naturally in tissue culture. So this may be a beneficial organism. We talked about fasciation a minute ago, and I said that was non-infectious fasciation. We have infectious fasciation resulting from a bacterium, and it produces huge numbers of buds, but those buds never develop. We just get an increase in the number of buds, but those just sit there and never do anything. So this happens to be daisy, Shasta daisy, and a cut flower grower, and that means loss of production for them, and so they are interested in getting rid of this. Here it is on Pelargonium. Those little plants will never develop into anything. They will just sit there like that. Here it is on Petunia. Here it is on rhododendron. A lot of plants become infected. If you have this, and if it bothers you, throw the plant away. There's no control for it, no cure for it, so just don't try to keep the plant going. A bacterium that you've seen down here, I'm sure, is the one that goes to oleander. The oleander gall organism produces galls on all of the above ground parts of the plants, the leaves, the stems, the fruits. Prevents the fruits from elongating like those on the right, and you get those knobs. A very infectious bacterium. We have no control for it. Sterilizing your shears won't do any good because the bacteria are all over the outside of the plant when you prune, so don't worry about that. I've known some nurseries that have quit producing oleanders because they can't control this. However, if you keep at it and prune, if I were pruning and the branches were small enough, I think I'd try to snap them off rather than cutting them, see if that would do some good. Closely related to that bacterium is one that goes to olive, causes olive knot. Olive knot relatively easy to control if it produces galls like this because you just prune those branches. But sometimes it produces galls like this all up and down the branches, and you'd have to prune out the whole branch in order to do anything. Phytoplasmas. We haven't talked about phytoplasmas. These are extremely small microorganisms, smaller than bacteria. You can't see them with the light microscope. You have to use an electron microscope. They are completely different than bacteria. They don't take a single shape. They can take any size, any shape that they conform to inside the cell. They don't have a rigid wall. They have a triple layered membrane. They're completely different, but they do cause some problems. Usually they cause stunning, but in onions that are going to seed, they cause those peduncles to elongate, and you get this beautiful effect. And I'm in the process of trying to gather together a bunch of different onions, and I'm going to infect them with this, and then I'm going to sell them as the skyrocket onions. An enlargement that you're familiar with, this is peachy leaf curl. Peach leaf curl results from infection by a fungus which invades the leaves, sometimes the stems, sometimes the flower buds, but mainly the leaves, causes them to be greatly enlarged. These leaves eventually will turn white, and we'll see that with signs. They then will drop from the plant, and they're no longer a problem. And they sort of lull you into a false sense of security because you think the disease was there and now it's gone. But that white on there is due to the mass of millions of spores, and they have blown around and landed on and in the bud scales for next year. And so they've already taken care of next year. So you have to do something to prevent that. Now, if you only had a single peach tree or nectarine tree, I would suggest that as soon as you see peach leaf curl, you go out and pick those off, get rid of them. Another fungus that's interesting is the one that goes to azaleas, produces these galls on azalea leaves. Big, large swelling. Sometimes the flowers are infected. Maybe we even have that. Yeah, here you can see a flower that's infected, greatly enlarged as a result of this fungus. Easy to control merely by picking off those galls and getting rid of them. Pick them off before they turn white because you get rid of the spore stage. That same fungus goes to manzanita. Doesn't produce a gall, but it causes the stem to be greatly enlarged, the leaves to come out to be enlarged, and turns them pink. And I think this is sort of pretty. If I had that, I don't think I'd try to control it. A fungus that perhaps you've seen on occasion, this is corn smut. Corn smut results from infection down through the silk. The fungus grows into a kernel, and each one of those is a single kernel that's been greatly enlarged. They aren't serious. I mean, they make them look bad. You wouldn't want to eat those unless you catch them early. People in Mexico consider this a delicacy. They have all sorts of recipes that they use for making. You wouldn't want to wait till this stage. When they begin to turn black like this, like some of those have, that means they've reached the spore stage, and that probably wouldn't taste very good. Rust fungi sometimes can produce swellings. This is gall rust on Monterey pine, produces a swelling. Doesn't damage the tree too much, but it does upset the hormone balance, and sometimes you'll get bud proliferation or branch proliferation from the ends of those galls. Galls can be quite large on occasion. Not too damaging to the trees, so don't worry about it. If it bothers you, prune them. Problem you may have is sometimes they're on the main stem. They are infected when they're young trees, and that gall just continues to develop. And then you may have to decide whether you want to cut out the whole top of that tree or get rid of the whole plant and start over again. Here's one of the most interesting fungi that I could discuss with you. This is a rust that goes to dichondra. Now the rust fungi are interesting. Rust fungi, and there are many of them. They're all host specific. The one that goes to dichondra doesn't go to pine. The one that goes to pine doesn't go to snapdragon, and so forth. The rust fungi are very common here. Now I've told you that we don't have many leaf infecting fungi here because we don't have condensed moisture in the summertime. But the rust fungi can infect in a shorter period of time than any of the other fungi, 5 or 6 hours. And dew formation is frequently 5 or 6 hours, so we have lots of rust. And on dichondra it's very common. We don't grow dichondra much anymore, mostly because of a little flea beetle, but we do have problems with rust occasionally. I think the rust is sort of beautiful, but the interesting thing is that dichondra is a ground cover. And the rust fungi virtually always, if they produce their spores on leaves, produce them on the underside. Well, in a ground cover, if the spores were produced on the underside, they would fall down and they wouldn't hit any leaves and there wouldn't be any infection at all. So the dichondra rust fungus has figured this out. So when it infects a leaf, it stimulates the petiole to grow and it lifts those infected leaves up above all the other leaves so that when the spores drop out, they can blow around and can infect them all. Don't you think these fungi are fascinating? There are uninfected leaves at the bottom, infected leaves at the top. If I had this in my dichondra, I wouldn't do anything. I would just sit back there and marvel at it. Powdery mildew. Most powdery mildews don't stimulate extra growth, but the one that goes to live oak does. If you force new growth in the summertime on any live oak, due to either watering or pruning or fertilization, the fungus is most active in the summertime and it will infect that new growth and it will produce these witch's brooms. And so don't do anything to your live oak trees in the summertime, ever. If you have witch's broom, don't prune them in the summertime because you're going to force more new growth and it's going to become infected. Wait until winter to prune it and then you won't have the problem because the fungus is not very active then. And here it is again. Now occasionally you'll see this occurring naturally. This happened on the campus. A branch of a big tree fell over and the top of it hit a portion of the live oak tree, knocked off a branch, and when this new branch came out in the summertime, it was covered with powdery mildew. Enlargements due to nematodes. Nematodes are members of the animal kingdom. They're closely related to earthworms. They live in the soil. They infect the roots. The one that produces these galls, called the root knot nematode, very common on many plants. They're high temperature organisms. They like it hot, and the warmer you grow plants, the warmer the area you live in, the more apt you are to have root knot nematode. Difficult to control. You can do it with soil solarization, but that means taking your soil out of practice for about 5 weeks. And you probably will talk about soil solarization in one of your classes in the future. Sometimes they can be very severe. This is on melons, and I was told that this melon crop was not doing very well. And you might understand why. Okay, insect galls. I told you that insects aren't involved in diseases earlier, but we do have a group of insects that lay their eggs in plants. They give off a chemical for a period of time which stimulates the growth, and so we get galls. And so this fits our definition of disease, you see. It's an injurious disturbance resulting from a continuing irritation. So I say that these are insect problems, but they're also galls. But they're usually not very damaging. This is the oak gall that you see a lot of. Here's another one that gets in the flowers of the oak trees and prevents the flowers from forming, and yet you get these nice galls. Sometimes the galls are very beautiful. I think this is just striking, and I wouldn't want to get rid of that if I had it at all. And here's one that's even more striking, and I think those are very pretty. Most of these galls that are formed in trees are not very serious. Oaks seem to be attractive to many of them, And I understand there's something like 127 or 135 different gall-forming insects that are attracted to oaks in California. This is the fuchsia mite. Mites sometimes can cause terrible problems. It doesn't take very many mites to do this, so they must be giving off a chemical which is doing this. And this was introduced into California about 1983. It's caused a lot of problems, difficult to control. The university does have a list of cultivars that are resistant to this, so if you're a fuchsia buff, you may want to get that list and grow them. And here's the citrus Bud Mite, which performs an extremely extraordinary circus on fruits, and I think those are interesting. Not all of the fruits on a plant are infected, just a few, and I just like that. Here's a lemon that's got it. Isn't that fantastic? This is pear blister mite. Because you live down in this area where pears are grown, you may see this. You get little bumps on the underside of the leaf, and down in that bump there are mites just swarming in there. You have to look at them under a hand lens, but if you see a problem on pears in the summertime that looks like this, be suspicious that it's the pear blister mite. Now we're going into stunting of plants. Lots of things can cause stunting. One of the most common ones is nutrient deficiency. The only nutrient our soils are deficient in is nitrogen, and the plant on the left was fed a balanced fertilizer. The one on the right was fed with no nitrogen, and you can see how important nitrogen is to the growth of the plant. Very, very serious to not have enough nitrogen. Not all soils are deficient in nitrogen, just the ones that we have here. These are some soils from the mountains, and in one of our classes we teach the student how to test for that. Take the soil and plant tomatoes in, then we take some and we add each of those different elements that you can see there, and by correlating all that we find with the growth of the tomato plants, we can tell exactly which nutrient is deficient. And very obviously the main problem here is phosphorus deficiency. A little bit of nitrogen deficiency, but mainly phosphorus. And the other elements not too serious, possibly a little bit of sulfur deficiency, but not much. Easy way to determine it. I have a sandy soil at home, and so I decided I would have my soil tested in with this pot technique, and I was sure there was some big deficiency there because my plants don't grow as well as I would like them to, and I don't have that good adobe that most people have, but anyway, we ran it through, and lo and behold, the only nutrient element that my soil was deficient in was nitrogen. So I buy nitrogen and put it on quite a bit. Cheapest way to buy nitrogen is to buy ammonium sulfate. Buy ammonium sulfate. Don't ever pay more than $1.99 for a 20-pound bag, and they frequently have it on sale for $1.99. And if you're lucky, at the end of the growing season, you may be able to buy it cheaper. One year Safeway marked their ammonium sulfate down to $1 for a 50-pound bag. I mean 20-pound bag, $1. And I'm only a partial gambler, so I only bought one bag. But in 2 weeks they marked it all down to 50 cents a bag, and I now have enough ammonium sulfate to last me the rest of the time I'm on this earth. Some deficiencies that you may never run into are interesting. This is copper deficiency. Plant on the right and the plant on the left are exactly the same plant. Plant on the right is suffering from copper deficiency. It happened because people changed their growing pattern, changed their nutrient supply, but they added extra nutrients, including copper. But they had so much organic material in the soil mix that they were tying up the copper, and the plants couldn't get any. And it was an old nursery, and so the water was running through steel pipes, so there was no copper there. If it had been a new nursery and they had been running through copper pipes, they'd been getting enough copper to take care of it. Just an interesting situation. You probably will never run into that. Here's probably copper deficiency on periwinkle or vinca. We haven't proven this yet, but it's so characteristic of it, and we're working on this at the present time. Another deficiency you probably never see is calcium deficiency. Our soils are abundant in calcium, but you may go someplace where people are using a completely artificial mix and it may not have enough calcium in it or may not be supplemented with enough calcium. That's what happened with this one. Calcium deficiency is very characteristic. It produces these shepherd crooks in the new growth. And if you ever see that, you can diagnose it right away. Zinc deficiency, called little leaf, affects a number of plants. The plant on the right is not affected, the other two are. And in the old days, when they first discovered that this was due to zinc deficiency, they corrected it in a very clever way. Do you all know what glazing points are? Glazing points are little triangular pieces of metal that they pound into wooden frames to hold glass in place. And they're galvanized, covered with zinc to prevent them from rusting. They found that if they pounded just a few of those into a tree, that it would correct the zinc deficiency in the tree. And because they're so small and sharp, they would heal over quickly and not cause any problems. Now they just spray the trees with zinc salts. But too much water sometimes can stunt plants. Plant on the left is all growing all right. The plant on the right is getting too much water. And it's because it's a bromeliad, and bromeliads are epiphytes. They grow on other plants. They want their roots out in the air. They don't want lots of water. Well, in our greenhouse, they got too much water, and so those plants are the same age. Just one got a lot more water than the other. More bromeliads, the same exact thing. They just do not want too much water. And this one I just saw about 3 weeks ago. I had to take a picture of it. This came from a nursery. They wanted to know what was wrong. The pot on the right didn't have any drainage holes. There was no drainage, and so that poor plant didn't grow. They're exactly the same age. Just shows you what too much water will do. Lack of air, whatever you want to call it. Phytoplasmas. We talked about phytoplasmas before. They sometimes will stunt plants. This is a disease called Western X. Western X infects peaches, cherries, a number of trees. Plant on the left is infected, the plant on the right is all right, and you can see how they're stunted. Not much you can do to control this. For a while they found that they could inject an antibiotic into the tree, but they had to do it every year, and so now they're not too interested in doing that. Here it is on cherries. The plant on the right is infected, the plant on the left isn't. In cherries they call it buckskin because the fruits turn sort of tannish and don't develop the way they should. Downy mildews. We don't see many downy mildews here, and I'm not going to spend too much time on them because they're not common. They're low temperature organisms. They like cold air. They like lots of moisture, and they like relative humidities 90% or greater, and we frequently don't have that, maybe during the winter months. But the downy mildews can do various strange things. Here's a downy mildew on snapdragon. Causes severe stunting. Those plants never will develop. Those sections will never develop. And if a snapdragon grower has those, he will lose lots of production. So you have to work at it to get rid of those plants if you see it, because they will never develop anything. Here's powdery mildew causing stunting. This powdery mildew is on crabapple, and it's infecting the flower buds on the left-hand side, and they are not going to open. They're just going to sit there like that. No good control for that either. If I had that, I would just prune it and get rid of it. Stunting due to soil-borne fungi. These plants have Verticillium Wilt. The plant on the right is more severely affected than the plant on the left, but you can see severe stunting as a result of infection by this fungus. Stunting due to the water molds. All of these plants have water molds, but notice the plant in the plastic pot is more severely affected. And this is because plastic is not the best thing for growing plants. Clay pots are the best thing. But clay pots are more expensive, they break easily, so we are getting away from clay pots and growing more in plastic. But there's no way of getting air down into the soil, and so we have a serious problem. This is one of the reasons why you see so many soilless mixes, potting mixes in the nurseries, because we had to get a lighter mix so that we could get air in through the top. If you use soil from your garden in a pot, you'll have a terrible time growing plants because it's just too heavy. The other thing is that we don't water them correctly. If you have plants in clay pots and they have any number of leaves, you should water them every day. If you have plants in a plastic pot, you should water them 1/3 to 1/5 as frequently as you do a clay pot. That's because it's not losing any water. But what happens? We have clay pots and plastic pots. So we underwater the clay pots and we overwater the plastic pots, and we expect those plants to... We're mean and nasty. Root rots causing stunting. The plants, two pots on the right have root rot fungi, and you can see the severe stunting that's resulting from them. These carnations, A, B, C, and D, are growing in soil that has a water mold fungus in. If you looked at only plants A, you would say there's nothing wrong. The plant's flowering, there are new shoots coming up from the bottom. But if you look at B, where we used one fungicide to control the fungus, or if you look at C, where we used another fungicide to control the fungus, or if you look at D, where we fumigated the soil and killed the fungus after it had been added, or if you look at the check where there was no fungus, you can see that the plants are growing much more vigorously. Just shows you what's going on. Now, how would you know that that had a fungus if all of your plants looked like A? You wouldn't, you see. Same thing here with ceanothus. This is growing at a very, very good nursery. We put a fungicide in to control the water molds in the three cans on the left. The one on the right we didn't. One on the right looks perfectly good, but when you see how much growth we get when we control that fungus, it makes a big difference. Well, what's the story here? The story here is that these fungi are present everywhere, and they're doing this to all plants, you see. So we don't expect perfect growth out of all plants, but we expect to get as much good out of the plants as we possibly can. And that is sort of important to try to do. So you say, well, what do we do to get the best growth out of the plants that we can? Well, you look to see where that plant is native. If it's native to western United States, particularly southwest, excuse me, or the Mediterranean area, or South Africa, or the southern part of Australia, means it doesn't want any summer water, only winter water. If it's native to eastern United States, or Europe, or eastern Asia, that means it gets summer rainfall. Give it summer rainfall. If it's native to the northern part of the countries, or high elevations, that means that the organic matter has accumulated and there's lots of it there, and you need that for aeration and give those plants that. And that will tell you how to grow your plants, and you will have far less trouble growing them than you would otherwise. Stunting due to viruses. Viruses can be pretty potent and stunt plants very severely. This is clematis. The one in the leaf in the center doesn't have a virus. The one on the other two outsides do, and you can see the severe stunning. Dahlia mosaic, a very severe virus. The plant on the left of that stake and the plant on the right are exactly the same variety. The one on the right has Dahlia mosaic virus, and the other one doesn't. Behind it, on the upper right-hand corner, the plant on the right doesn't have the virus. That little tiny stub on the bottom does have the virus. From this, you would think that maybe it might be easy to control the Dahlia mosaic virus by merely getting rid of the ones that are infected and showing this severe stunning. The problem is that there are many varieties out there, and really cultivars, not varieties, cultivars that have the virus and don't show any symptoms. And it's these typhoid Marys that are the problem. Virus in ranunculus, showing stunting. Privet, virus, showing stunting. And as I grow this plant on, the stunting is even more severe. And pretty soon in the markets you're going to see a new dwarf privet, which is going to be the result of a plant that's infected with virus. If it doesn't have the virus in my greenhouse, the plants grow clear up to the top of the greenhouse. If they have virus, they only grow about that far, and they're real bushy. We'll be able to make a beautiful hedge out of a virus-infected plant. Color changes. Color changes usually result in yellow colors appearing. We've already talked about that. And there are a number of different causes. The most common one probably is nutritional. This is deficiency due to iron. Iron is not deficient on our soils. We have plenty of iron in our soils to take care of all of our plants, but the problem is our soils tend to be basic. And when they're basic, the iron is in a less soluble form, and therefore plants can't get them, particularly introduced plants. And some are very sensitive. Hydrangeas, very, very sensitive to lack of iron. But many of them, here's a rose. Isn't that a beauty? Some people choose to call that the Christmas tree effect. Doesn't look like a Christmas tree to me, but then we each have our own ideas about this. Always the new growth, not the old growth. And the reason for this is because once iron gets in the plant, it's fixed and does not move. Therefore, as the plant grows and runs out of iron, it's the new growth that shows that. And sometimes it's beautiful. Tibucina has red color anyway. When I plant that in my garden, I'm going to throw a couple pieces of plaster in the hole just to make sure that there's lots of calcium there to tie up the iron and give me iron deficient ones. Gardenia, very, very susceptible. This just shows you one of the controls. There are several controls. Of course, one is to make the soil more acid, which may take you a while, but the other is to use iron chelate. And you can spray iron chelate on plants. Plant on the left and the plant on the right were exactly the same 1 month before this picture was taken. Plant on the right was sprayed with iron chelate, plant on the left wasn't, and you can see the type of difference. Now, not all plants will respond to iron this way, but many will. Here's an interesting problem that we found in a nursery. Iron deficiency in all of those seedlings coming up. And they said that they hadn't changed anything at all. They didn't know how it could have occurred. So we took the tissues in and analyzed them. They were not deficient in iron, but they had an excess of manganese. Well, we know there has to be a balance between manganese and iron in the plant, and as a result, because there was extra manganese, they needed iron. They didn't have the extra iron, so they showed iron deficiency. This may be manganese deficiency. This is an older leaf on a plant, and we see this on fruitless mulberry and other trees occasionally. We don't know exactly if it is manganese. We correct it with manganese chelate. But if you talk to a soil scientist or plant nutritionist, he or she will tell you that manganese deficiency also appears on the new growth. And this is the old growth. So somebody needs to do some more research work on this. Nitrogen deficiency, the most common deficiency, appears in the old growth, and this is because nitrogen is movable. As the new growth grows, it can take it from the expense of the old growth, and you'll see it in the old growth. Very common in many, many plants. Smog damage. Smog damage occurs as a bronzing on the undersurfaces of the leaves. This is due to the fact that the materials penetrate through the stomata. They kill the tissues around the opening, and this causes a stretching or a glazing of the epidermis, and you get that bronzing effect. Purpling. Purpling sometimes is an indication of phosphorus deficiency, but not necessarily. We don't know. Here's ethylene damage. Ethylene damage, one of the air pollutants, prevents carnation flowers from opening, and it also causes the color to fail to develop. And so ethylene can cause some problems. Weed killers. This is a weed killer called aminotriazole. Causes a distinct color change in the new growth, and those plants will die as a result of it. Very characteristic, very diagnostic. If you see new growth on plants turn completely yellow or almost white like that, you know that it has aminotriazole weed killer. This is a weed killer that I found on some sumac. I couldn't find out what was causing it, but it really is very, very beautiful. And I would like to find out what it is, because I'd like to spray some sumac to do that. But excess light causes a color change. Now, don't call this sunburn. This is not sunburn. Tissues aren't burned. This is just excess light, and the light causes the chlorophyll to disappear. This is a reversible reaction, and if you put that back in shade, the color will come back again. Happens on camellias and a number of plants. You can see the lower portion of this leaf that was hanging down doesn't have it. It's a very interesting situation. And as I say, it happens on a lot of plants. Here, see how that bud shielded that from the sunlight, and so it's green underneath it. The large leaf climbing fig and the small leaf climbing fig do the same thing. Star jasmine does the same thing. Clivia, extremely sensitive to sunlight. If you like Clivia, you know you have to grow it in the shade because that's the only way it'll grow. Now I think that knowing this, you can have a lot of fun with this if you want to. For example, if you wanted to cut out some stars or some moons and clamp them onto the leaves and then leave them there for a while, you could have stars or moons on your leaf. Take them off and call your neighbors over and tell them somebody's sending you messages, you know. If the leaf were big enough, you could even write love letters, and then if you change your mind, take it off and everything would disappear and you'd have no problems. So I think somebody could have some fun. This is a very interesting color change. Those of you who have grown African violets or any members of the African violet family perhaps have seen this. This is due to a rapid temperature change in the presence of light. Both are necessary. And how do we get a rapid temperature change in the presence of light on African violets? We water them with cold water. If you water them with cold water in the presence of light, you're going to develop this, and it's sort of pretty. And in fact, if you can't do it, what you can do is you can put some ice cubes in a glass of water, let it stand for half an hour, then take your African violet over there and dip a leaf or two in, pull it out in the presence of light, and you'll produce those beautiful hieroglyphics. Isn't that nice? Any member of the African violet family will do this. And it's due to several factors. One is the fact that members of this family have their chloroplasts only in a single layer of cells. And so anything that damages that layer of cells, there's a color loss. This is not reversible. That light damage that we looked at was reversible. This is not reversible. That chlorophyll is damaged, but the cells aren't dead. It's just that the chlorophyll is destroyed. This is gloxinia. It doesn't always produce rings in gloxinia, but it sometimes does. It does to all members of the African violet family. On your outline, this is listed as old age. Evergreen plants, even though they are considered evergreen, still go through a cycle where they get rid of some of their leaves each year, and it depends upon what plant it is. Sometimes they go through various color patterns. This happens. Camellias sometimes do this. I've seen camellias turn red on occasion. Rhododendrons sometimes turn red and yellow. I tried to keep those leaves on the plant. I did everything possible, but they're ready to go and they're going to drop off, and that's why they change color. So you just accept this, but people will bring you specimens of this when you do some of your service work, and they'll want to know what's wrong with that plant, and it's just old age. This is a bleeding canker. Color change due to a bacterium, I guess, although fungi are involved. Bleeding cankers are interesting because they develop on many, many plants. And what happens is that the plant is wounded somehow, and various bacteria and fungi, mostly yeast-like fungi, get in and they start fermenting the sap. And as they ferment the sap, they are toxic. These are toxic materials that are produced, fermentation products, and they prevent the cambium from healing, so more sap collects, more fermentation goes on, and eventually you get this running right down the side of the tree, staining the side of the tree. Very simple to control. All you have to do is open that, expose it to air, and be sure that no water can collect in that wound. And if you do that, eventually it'll dry out, the cambium will begin to heal over, and eventually the whole thing will be healed. No problem at all. You don't have to paint it with any gunk. Don't ever believe that. That's an old person's tale. Don't believe that. Just leave it exposed and it will heal. Some of the leaf spotting fungi produce very beautiful colors, and I'm not going to go through a lot of them, but just to show, isn't that a beautiful leaf spot? How can you lose? Here is fire blight when it's active in the plant tissues. You may never see this, but when the fire blight bacteria move through the tissues, they move very rapidly, they kill very rapidly, but in the process they turn the tissues pink like that. This is due to some of the very primitive microorganisms that we've already talked about, and they cause certain flowers to fail to develop, the petals to fail to develop, and they go back, they revert back to leaf-like structures. And in the process, they produce chlorophyll and they start manufacturing food like leaves. Well, flowers originally were leaves. They've been modified from leaves, so this is just reversing that particular process. And so we see this on occasion. Here's another one. This is vinca, and these are affected by that same phytoplasma, and it's called aster yellow's phytoplasma. Causes the leaves to fail to develop, causes the color to fail to develop, and causes the color to fail to develop in the flowers, which is sort of interesting. Here's phytoplasma and zinnia. Only the upper portion of the flower is affected, turning to green-like structure. And notice in the center, the complete flowers, the little tiny flowers, which are the complete flowers in the composite family, fail to develop. The lower portion, which is not affected, they're developing. So it causes several things to happen. Here's a phytoplasma in status. And here we just got a bunch of proliferation and practically no flowers at all. This is called virescens. It's another phytoplasma. It isn't the common one that we see, but in hydrangeas it prevents the flower head from developing, prevents the color from developing. You don't get to see this very often because when they grow hydrangeas, if they see this, they throw that plant away because it's infected. They can never get rid of it. They can't do anything about it. And so because they propagate from these plants all the time, they want to make sure that they don't propagate from them. But every once in a while, one will sneak through, and you can see it. Color changes due to water moles. This is one of the best diagnostic tools that you can have. Once the water moles start moving up the stem, they kill the tissues and they turn them brown or black. They usually don't move very far up the plant, so eventually you can find a place where the wood is still good and you can find the demarcation line between the diseased area and the healthy area. And if you can find that, then you can be almost certain that water moles killed those plants. Now, the problem is that you have to do this right while the plant is on its way out. You cannot wait a year and then go in and cut into it and say, aha, it's brown, water moles kill that. You have to do it right when its plant's on its way. But if you do, we don't even bother to culture from this. We know that that's water mold. Here it is in camellia. Again, you see we've cut to the top of that brown area. We know that water molds did it. Here it is in rhamnus. In rhamnus, it turns the wood just black. But again, very diagnostic, very easy to diagnose when you have that problem. And a few plants that are herbaceous, you can see it on the outside. This happens to be a Martha Washington geranium. Other geraniums do this. You can actually see that dark discoloration moving up that stem. If you see that, don't try to save this plant. Just because one branch is gone, you say, oh, I'll pull that out and let the other. They're going to go too. Now, if you want to save that plant, take a tip cutting, root it, and it'll be all right. But don't plant it back in that same hole again. Verticillium. In the upper branches, if you cut into the upper branches and peel back the bark, if you have verticillium, you frequently will find this discoloration. And this is very diagnostic and will help you. But sometimes you can have a verticillium infected plant and you can't find that discoloration. And that may be explained on the basis of what we see in this particular branch. Now, if you cut into the present season's growth on the lower right-hand side, you'd miss the discoloration because the discoloration was in last season's growth. If you cut into the present season's growth on the upper left-hand side, you'll find the discoloration because it's right there. But if you cut into the branch on the lower left-hand side, you wouldn't see anything and you'd say no verticillium, but the plant still could have verticillium. So the moral of this story is, again, if you think you have verticillium and you can't find any discoloration, and you may not be able to, you have to get it to a plant pathologist so he or she can culture it and find out for sure. Fusarium does the same thing. Fusarium causes discoloration in tissues. This happens to be the Hebe with the Fusarium, and the discoloration is more pronounced than it is with the verticillium. You notice the verticillium was sort of in little strikes and patches. This is more or less continuous. That might help it, but you're going to say, well, how can you tell that for water mold? Because it's in the main stem. Well, you may have to go to a plant pathologist to find out for sure, you see. We're beginning now to look at some fungus spots where there's a color change, but it's due to the fact that the fungus is producing some chemical. And in black spot of rose, all that yellowing is due to the fact that they think the fungus is producing ethylene. And ethylene causes that discoloration. It also causes the abscission layer to form, and that's what causes the leaves to fall when they have black spot on rose. Here's that beautiful Entomosporium leaf spot on Rhaphiopus. Look at that pretty purple color. We don't know what's causing that, but there's something causing that beautiful purple color around each one of those spots. And evergreen pear, when it has Entomosporium leaf spot, absolutely beautiful. I think that's fantastic. My neighbor had this plant in his yard, and he had this fungus on it, and I didn't tell him what it was, all that beautiful discoloration on those leaves. And a couple of years ago, he cut the plant down. He didn't even ask me. So now I'm going to have to plant that in my yard and infect it with that fungus so that I can have those beautiful leaves again. Interesting leaf spot, brand new, just recent in California. But look at that pretty spot, that purple ring around the outside. Isn't that pretty? Come on, admit it. Discoloration in peach leaf curl. Peach leaf curl frequently causes the tissues to turn red or pink. Various colors, probably due to the fact that it's preventing the materials that are being manufactured from being translocated away from the infected areas, and these sugars are then being transformed into anthocyanins or other pigments. Coloration due to virus infection. Most common viruses produce sort of a mosaic pattern. A mosaic pattern is a modeling of lighter green or darker green, usually with no restriction to the veins or having anything to do with the veins. Not always, but usually. And if you see a mosaic pattern like that, you can almost be certain that that's a virus. This happens to be P with a virus. Here's clematis. I showed you this before. Very fantastic mosaic pattern. Potato with a virus. This is alfalfa virus in potato, and it produces that very distinct pattern. Sometimes with certain viruses you'll get a vein clearing. Now this looks exactly like what that you've seen just recently. I'll tell you, iron deficiency. Remember? But iron deficiency, it's the veins that are last to lose their color. With the virus, it's the veins that lose their color. Somebody's going to try to trick you on this someday, so don't let them. So here the veins have lost their color. This is an interesting virus in geranium. In the early spring, when the temperatures are low, these symptoms are produced. As the temperatures increase in the summertime, these symptoms disappear, and you won't be able to tell that that plant is infected with a virus. Rose mosaic virus. Very, very beautiful virus. Doesn't damage the plants hardly at all. Don't worry about it if you have it. It can't spread. Only by grafting or budding or rooting an infected cutting. Really a beautiful virus. Can take different symptoms though. All three of these came from a virus-infected plant in my garden. And you can see all types of different symptoms. Vein clearing, blotching, everything. So the symptoms can appear differently on different leaves on the same plant. Virus in gladiolus causes sort of a streaking because of the parallel veins. So if you see a monocotyledonous plant with a virus, you may see sort of a streaking. And virus on zucchini, I think this is sort of nice, and I think we should infect plants with this virus, and then you could have both yellow and green squash at the same time. You wouldn't have to buy two different ones, you could have them all in the same one, right? We briefly mentioned spotted wilt virus when we said that it kills romaine plants. Do you remember that? Well, spotted wilt virus is common in many plants in the garden, and I'm not going to show you many, but just a few. Commonly, it produces rings, very commonly. And you see the rings in that dahlia plant? Very characteristic. It also goes to callan, it goes to chrysanthemum, and here it is on gerbera, producing rings. If you see that, then you know that you have spotted wilt virus. Spotted wilt virus is transmitted by thrips. And it means one thing, and that is that if you have callas or dahlias or any of these in your garden, and they have that, don't plant them near your vegetables, because it's going to be transmitted to the vegetables, and the cos or romaine lettuce is going to be killed. In tomatoes, it's going to produce something like this. The fruits are very, very distinctly discolored, and you might not even want to eat one of those. So be sure you keep all those plants away that are susceptible to the spotted wilt virus, the ornamentals, away from your vegetable garden. Sometimes we use a virus-infected plant as an ornamental plant. This is variegated abutilon. This is due to a virus. It's transmitted only by budding or grafting, so you don't have to worry about it spreading in your garden, but it is a virus. Nandina. We grow that plant with the new red foliage because we like that red foliage. That's due to a virus. In fact, maybe one of two different viruses can do that. And so we sell variegated plants that are virus infected. We sell different colored plants that are virus infected. It's a common practice. Sometimes viruses will cause a color break in the flowers. And here's color break in stock. Very, very beautiful. 12 different viruses in the cabbage family can cause this color break in stock, which I think is sort of nice. I like it. Pansies with a virus. Absolutely beautiful when they have that virus. Another one. Sweet pea with a virus. That should be a pink one. That virus does stunt the plant a little bit and will be a source of virus to other plants. It's transmitted by aphids, so you may want to get rid of that. But I like variegated plants, variegated flowers, so I keep it in my garden. The most beautiful of all probably are the tulip color break virus. It causes tulips to change color. All of those are the same variety. They should be solid red. They have varying amounts of yellow in them, and that's all due to a virus. This is a variegated tulip. The one right in the center shows you the white margin. That's the way it should be. The two on the right have some virus in, showing the changes that result from that particular virus. These are all the same variety. The two on the right have virus. Aren't they beautiful? Fantastic. Now the virus will stunt the plant a little bit. May not last as long, but I think they're pretty nice. They used to sell them under the name of Rembrandt tulips in the garden catalog. They still sell Rembrandt tulips, but they're not virus infected anymore. They're natural color variegation like the last one I showed you. And they're cheating because they show you pictures of virus infected ones, but they're not selling you virus infected ones. However, if you buy a big enough batch of tulips from any tulip grower, probably one or two will have that virus. And eventually it will spread in the garden. If you want to, you can make it spread, or you can let aphids develop on it and lift the aphids off on your other ones, and they will transmit the virus. Here's a double-flowered tulip that has the virus. And of course, tulips, when they have the virus, they're extremely outstanding, but they're really just fantastic when they have the virus. How can you lose, right? Okay, now we're going to talk about signs. Signs we didn't define before. We diagnose some diseases by signs. Signs are visible manifestations of disease as shown by the causal agent. In other words, we're looking right at the causal agent. Visible manifestations of disease as shown by the causal agent. And so we're going to look at some where we diagnose them that way. This happens to be fire blight. You see those globs hanging down the stem? Those are bacteria that have oozed out. And if you see those coming out of a pear branch or an apple branch, and this happens to be apple, by the way, then you'll know that that's a source of the bacteria. These bacteria either can be splashed into flowers by rain, or they can be carried inadvertently by insects crawling up and down the plant. And if they visit the flowers, they carry the fire blight bacteria into the flowers. Once in the flowers, honeybees transmit the bacteria from flower to flower, and so it really goes. So be sure you prune those in at least the fall of the year to get rid of them so that they can't go through the winter and produce those early in the spring when the plant's in flower. Powdery mildews we diagnose by signs. Powdery mildew fungi are interesting. They do not want condensed moisture. They're completely different than all of the other fungi, and that's why we have so many powdery mildews in the summertime here. They like this dry climate. They also like reduced light intensities. They like warm days and cool nights. What better place than this for powdery mildews? And so we have a lot of them. Some of them go to a lot of plants. Some of them only go to a few. The one that plagues us most is the one that's on rose, infects the new growth. Some powdery mildews infect only the old growth, some infect the new growth. If it infects the old growth, not too bad. That plant's probably getting ready to retire anyway. But when they infect the new growth, then you have problems. And the one on rose infects the new growth. And here's the powdery mildew fungus, just to show you what's going on. Powdery mildew fungus is external to the plants, and it has these vegetative strands growing all over, and on top of those strands are these chains. And the fungus produces a new spore on the tip of each chain every 24 hours. A diurnal effect. In the very early morning, that new spore is shed, and it's blown around, and then by the next morning, that chain produces another one. Well, you can see there are only 80 million chains there, so there are only 80 million spores being produced every day. These are airborne spores. They blow around, they land wherever, and if they're on a susceptible host, they don't need that water to germinate. They will germinate and infect, start the whole cycle again. Closely related are the sooty molds, but they do not attack plant tissues. They only are growing on materials that are either excreted by insects or secreted by the plants themselves. They do not damage the plant, except they make it look unsightly, and they probably prevent some of the sunlight from hitting the plant. If you want to control them, usually look for the insects that's causing it. They grow on honeydew, and a number of insects produce honeydew, so you want to control those insects. The rust fungi. We talked a little bit about the rust fungi. They tend to be host-specific, but the rust fungi are very interesting. Here is one on iris. Here's that beautiful one on dichondra. Isn't that fantastic? Here's one on fuchsia. Geranium. Snapdragon. This is the bane of anybody who wants to grow snapdragons. Problem is that because our climate is mild, we can grow snapdragons over a very long period. What we need to do is, if we're going to grow snapdragons, is have a snapdragon-free period. Then we can break that rust cycle, but you have to pick up all the old leaves because there's a resting spore stage that this can produce and carry through. So sanitation and breaking the cycle will help. Rose rust is interesting because in the early part of the year, the spores that are produced are orange, and these are the repeating spores, and they can infect more rose plants. In the fall of the year, as the plant begins to go downhill, the fungus detects that. Instead of producing the repeating spore stage, it produces the resting spore stage. And these are black spores, and they're absolutely beautiful. You look at them under the microscope, they're just amazing. And in fact, the very first fungus spore that ever was drawn using the microscope after it was invented was this one. They knew it was going to be pretty. However, if you have this, be sure that you prune your roses into dormancy, first of all, in the wintertime, and be sure you pick up all the leaves, because this resting spore will carry the rust fungus through and start the cycle next spring again. Signs, we're still looking at signs. Remember azalea gall that I told you about could infect either the leaves or the flowers. During part of its cycle, it produces this white stage. And when it produces this white stage, those are the spores of the fungus. They're going to blow around and infect the new growth. Be sure you pick those galls before it reaches the white stage. Same thing is true with peach leaf curl. When it turns white like this, there are just millions of spores being produced, and they're blowing around, and they're lodging on and in the scales, the bud scales for next year, and they're taken care of next year. One of the problems that you're going to see a lot of in this area is the okra fungus. The okra fungus is a very serious disease-producing agent, has a wide host range, goes mainly to woody plants, but it'll also go to some herbaceous plants, and we have a serious problem with it. It will frequently kill plants, and the only way you usually can tell is to peel back the bark at or just below the soil line on the main stem. And if you peel it back and you see this layer of white fungus tissue, you know you have the okra fungus. Nothing else looks exactly like that. Now, on all plants, it will not look like this. Here it is in almond. In almond has a furrowed bark, and so it's going to be in furrows. Roses have a plate-like bark. Grapes have a plate-like bark. It'll be in little platelets, but it'll still be that white layer. And if you think you can't tell for sure, cut the material, and when it's fresh, it will have an odor like fresh mushrooms. And this is diagnostic. Now, it has to be fresh, because if you wait until it's dried out, it will lose that odor. But if you suspect you have oak root fungus, peel back the bark, and if you smell it, if you like mushrooms, it'll make your mouth water. It smells that good, really. And that will help you diagnose it. Now, during the winter months, the oak root fungus will produce mushrooms around some infected plants. Not all. So if you don't have mushrooms, you can't say that you don't have the oak root fungus. The mushrooms will vary in size from, these are about 1.5 inches in diameter because they're a lot produced in a clump, up to, these are 8 or 9 inches in diameter. These are from my own rose garden, by the way. The mushrooms produce billions of spores, but they're not infective, so you don't have to worry about them. If you see mushrooms, don't worry. They're not going to spread from the spores. Control of the oak root fungus is difficult, very difficult. It exists only in old roots in the soil. It does not exist free in the soil in any way, form, or manner. It does not grow through the soil. It cannot grow through the soil. The only way infection can take place is for a root of a susceptible plant to come in actual contact with an old root that has it in it. And that's the only way you can get infection. The problem is once a root is killed or a plant is killed, the fungus likes the dead wood better than it does living root wood, and it will move all throughout that whole system, and it will create a hot box for you. So if you have a plant that dies with the oak root fungus, the more of that woody material you can remove, the better it is for whatever you're going to plant. However, if you do have that problem, I suggest you to get the list of resistant plants from the Extension Service and use this as a guide. Now, one thing about that list, I've had many people complain to me about that list and say, such and such a plant is on your list as being resistant and it died in my yard. One thing you have to know, and that is that the oak root fungus, just like the water moles, is an opportunistic fungus, and it likes weakened plants. And so if you weaken a resistant plant with anything, too much water, too much salt, not enough water, it's going to become a susceptible plant. So as long as the plant's growing under good conditions in a resistant plant, it will stay that way. The heart rot fungi. We talked about the heart rot fungi. Sometimes you will see them on the outside of the plants. If you see these, you know that that tree has heart rot. The problem is that these usually are not produced very low to the ground. They're produced up in the air because they come out only through old dead branches. But occasionally you will see them right around the base of a plant. And if you see them around the base of the plant, I would be worried. Okay? And they come in different forms. Here's another one. This last one is a perennial form, and this one is an annual form. A new one is formed each year. Many different kinds of plants can be infected. Here is brown rot. You're actually seeing the fungus, that little brown fuzz. Those are the spores of the fungus being produced by the millions. And they blow around, but they only infect flowers, so you don't have to worry too much. Fruits, too. Remember the fungus that we said was sclerotinia, got into the lettuce and caused a rot in the plant? Well, when sclerotinia is growing through the plant, it produces these white wefts, and then it produces, see those black structures in there? It produces those black structures, and those are the resting bodies, and they fall to the ground, and they carry the fungus through to the next crop that you plant and start the whole infection over again. Most vegetables in just a watery mass. In fact, the disease in many plants is called watery soft rot. It won't infect your compost heap, but if you use the slow compost method, you may not kill those resting bodies. If you use the rapid one, it will. So I wouldn't put any sclerotinia in my compost unless I was using the rapid method. Camellia petal blight, you remember I told you they form those little hard resting bodies that fall to the ground? Well, here there's one falling to the ground. It's germinating to produce those little cups. And if we look at the next slide, over to the left we can see the tops of those cups. They're big enough so that you can see them with the naked eye if you know what you're looking for. Those spores are actually thrown out of the cup into the air, and they're carried by air currents, and if they land on a camellia petal in the presence of a drop of moisture, they start the whole cycle again. Botrytis, we talked about botrytis. You can see the signs. See that fuzz? This will help you identify that particular disease. Scab. We have several kinds of scab. One that goes to pyracantha and loquat. It causes a blackness on the leaves. These are actual spores of the fungus. This is not diseased leaf tissue. This is a sign. And this fungus also goes to toyon. You can see it on all three of those plants. Black spot of rose, you're actually looking at the fungus. This is not a dead spot in the leaf. This is the fungus. Smut diseases, we don't see too many of them. Once in a while, but sometimes they replace the whole grains and they turn, these tissues just turn black, and those are the spores of the fungus. They're just produced in masses. And if you see that, you know that you need to get rid of that plant. We do have some parasitic plants that we didn't talk about. This happens to be dodder, spelled D-O-D-D-E-R, it's on your outline. Parasitic seed-bearing plant. Winds itself around the plant, has no chlorophyll, produces little strands that go in and attach to both the xylem and the phloem, the food-conducting and the water-conducting elements in the plant. And it takes a lot of strength out of the plant. Can severely stunt plants. And they produce seeds that are capable of being transmitted with seed, or they also can be broken off. These vines that wind around can be broken off. And for instance, in alfalfa, where they have a serious problem, as they mow, sometimes they will break pieces off. If the piece is long enough and it's laid against an alfalfa stem, it can start winding around and start the plant growing again. Can be a very, very serious problem. If you have it and you don't like it, be sure you cut all of the plants and get rid of them. Don't leave them around at all. And the other plant that we have which causes some problems is mistletoe. We have two types of mistletoe in California, leafy mistletoe and dwarf mistletoe. Leafy mistletoe is not a very serious problem. Leafy mistletoe doesn't damage plants, except occasionally it will cause the stem to swell and crack and secondaries will get in. But rarely damages plants. However, there are people who will argue with you about this. They will tell you, oh, it's damaging my plant. I say, just take it and like it. Frequently makes an evergreen plant out of a deciduous plant. And so why not have it and take advantage of it? But people don't like it and they will argue with you about it. I love to argue, so we do argue. But the proof of this whole thing is that early in this century, some old German scientists took some mistletoes and they infected half of an apple orchard with the mistletoes, and they didn't infect the other half. And they went in and they picked all the leaves off of the apple trees as they appeared. The plants with the mistletoe lived longer than the plants without the mistletoe. So what does that tell us? It tells us that the mistletoe is giving something back to the plants and not just taking. And so I find it difficult to accept the fact that mistletoes are killing plants, except this guy. This is a dwarf mistletoe. We don't have it down in our elevations. We have it up in the mountains. But it's probably the most serious disease-producing agent we have in our forests. Very, very important. Gets into small branches, but when it gets into big portions of the tree, it can cause the tops of the trees to die, can cause all sorts of problems. And so the way they control this now is by mixed stands, because these tend to be host-specific. So they plant mixed stands. These spread by throwing their seeds. They can throw their seeds 50 feet laterally. So by using mixed stands, they can prevent the spread of this. And that's the way it's being done. And I'm sure that that's the last slide, and everybody now can leave.
The preceding program was part 2 of 2 parts, each 90 minutes long. There is support material available at this website, including quizzes, handouts, and lecture outlines for all presentations. Consult the UCTV programming guide for the date and time that other lectures in the series will be shown.
It's the definitive guide to gardening, produced by the University of California. The California Master Gardener Handbook is available along with other gardening publications on the A&R Catalog website at anrcatalog.ucdavis.edu.